So, yeah, behind you.
Yeah, regarding scientific uncertainty, maybe could you discuss your thoughts regarding 2,4-D and other herbicides that are used in forestry?
What a great question. Apropos of my saying, when you bump into someone, go talk to them, I've never met Roosevelt Assange, which is kind of amazing. He's Minister of Health, former Premier of British Columbia. He's now got on his desk the decision on 2,4-D. I ran into him in the airport coming in from Vancouver Sunday night. So as I said, you've got 1 minute. He said, excuse me, I've always it was actually true this time. I actually always had wanted to meet him. I actually have always admired him because he stood up to extremists and he got beaten up for it. And I think he's a fine man. And I got to meet his wife. And then I said, and please, whatever you do, don't give 2,4-D a clean bill of health. Because that's what the recommendation is right now from the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, is to say 2,4-D is safe. So that's, if you care about that issue, let me talk about scientific uncertainty to really answer your question. 2,4-D, 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid, is one of the phenoxy herbicides that was half of Agent Orange. It should never have been given a clean bill of health. But in dealing with the health impacts of Agent Orange, the cop-out, I think it was a cop-out at the time, was to say, look, it's all 2,4,5-T that's the problem. 2,4,5-T is contaminated with 2,3,7,8-TCDD, and it's the thing that causes cancer, it's the thing that causes chloracne, it's the thing that causes birth defects. So we're going to ignore the several hundred other isomers of dioxin and furans that are in 2,4-D, and just assume that the whole problem with Agent Orange was 2,4,5-T. For the last 20 years, 2,4-D has been under review at Health Canada. But the reality is, and this is really weird, the health evidence on 2,4-D being linked to human cancer, particularly human cancer, malignant lymphoma, soft tissue sarcomas, is quite substantial. Studies in Sweden, studies in Saskatchewan, studies in Kansas, a lot of farm worker exposure, forest worker exposure. There's even some evidence from golf courses, okay? And there's a line of evidence from canine lymphoma from dogs in homes that use 2,4-D. This is all the evidence from actual experience in the world, which in human cases is called epidemiology. Okay. Problem, if you do the work in the lab, you don't get the same results. If you're working on lab rats, apparently, and I have no problem with this, if they want to license 2,4-D for use that will only affect lab rats, I'm okay. Because it does not seem to bother lab rats. It seems to kill people and dogs, and God knows what else, but lab rats, well, then there was an article published in Nature which said that the rat DNA differed significantly from ours in how to detoxify people. Well, that was interesting because I thought, well, maybe that explains why you don't seem to be able to cause cancer in lab rats using 2,4-D. But 2,4-D is a significant health risk. The Ontario Family Physicians of Ontario, their body of association is called that. And they call for the removal of these chemicals because of, under the precautionary principle, that you just run too big a risk of cancer. Now, these chemicals are used on lawns, gardens, for cosmetic reasons to get rid of dandelions. The real gain here is that the industry doesn't want to see them restricted from where we're exposed to them and where children are most exposed to them, because they figure what's going to happen next is removing them from agriculture. And maybe that would happen next, but what we're primarily campaigning on is the exposure, the use of the chemical that it creates the greatest likelihood of harm to the human population, particularly vulnerable groups like pregnant women, children, the unborn. You really don't want this stuff used to get rid of dandelions. So any day now, Assange can make that decision. And I didn't like the answer I got at the airport while he was waiting for his suitcase. So that's a letter I would be very, very grateful if people wrote the Minister of Health and said, we're really concerned, we don't want to see 2,4-D re-registered. One of the things we've told him is that because his review was done by the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, based primarily on lab work, he ought to convene a panel of medical doctors and epidemiologists and let them look at the evidence. And so if he's got the evidence from his own bureaucrats, it's hard for him to ignore the evidence from his own bureaucrats. On the other hand, one of the reasons I admire him was that Health Canada bureaucrats told him that it was not a good idea to require that pharmaceutical companies have a system for mandatory reporting of adverse drug reactions. The bureaucrats didn't want that, and Assange announced it anyway. So I think he has some real core of decency. But he needs to hear from a lot more Canadians about why we don't want 2,4-D registered again. I mean, it is registered now, but we don't want them giving it this nice clean bill of health. But scientific uncertainty can be tricky, which is why in an issue like that, you say, well, let's use the precautionary principle. If we, for instance, prohibit the use of 2,4-D for killing dandelions, what's the worst thing that can happen? A lot of dandelions. If we continue using it and we're wrong about how great it is, what's the worst thing that can happen? A lot more deaths and suffering from lymphoma. Yeah.
Is your excellent advice available on the web?
The effects. What I would say to you is rely on your gut instincts. 2,4-D, the way it kills the plants is it causes them to grow to death. It's unstoppable growth. Well, your gut will tell you a cell is the cell is the cell. A plant cell, an animal cell, a human cell. They run the same way. And cancer is growth, unlimited growth. So just apply that to the human body. Now, whilst the issue of dandelions seems like a moot point, when they use 2,4-D in the forest, what happens? You have issues of spray drift. You have issues of biomagnification, which means like each bird eats 10 blueberries, so the exposure is magnified 10 times in them. And when you go up there to pick your blueberries and drink your water on your canoe trip, there are no signs posted to say that this area was sprayed with 2,4-D. It's up to you to look around and know the plants well enough. And when you see some brown poplars standing in the midst of little tiny green conifers, you have to know that what that means is you just exposed yourself to 2,4-D. So, Elizabeth, I'd like to thank you so much because I've followed your career and you've been a great inspiration to us in Northern Ontario.
Oh, that's very kind of you. The key thing that any activist needs to know is that if you're persistent and you never give up and you hold as your goal that which is really most important, you'll eventually get it. So I think people say, what do you feel like when you lose a campaign? I don't think I've ever lost a campaign. We've had